You raise me up. In the midst of that blessing, unfortunately, we do have to face the world's brutality. As we explored in my last sermon, we are faced with the reality of othering, of treating some people as worth less than others. And one of the primary sources of othering was colonialism, which, supported by the doctrine of discovery, led to the brutal dehumanizing of most, if not all, of the inhabitants of the newly explored, discovered continents of Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Colonization has had long-lasting impact on the ways in which our cultures have been historically shaped by both individual and institutional othering. The primary populations which have suffered the most, which have been labeled and treated as non-human, heathens, savages, and slaves, have been indigenous peoples, Blacks, and non-European immigrants. The unbelievable suffering imposed by settlers and invaders and the privileged over the last 500 years has had a lasting, immeasurably destructive impact, which continues even today. Hartman Dietz, writing as a Mashpee Wampanoag New England Native American, recently said, the Wampanoag have the distinction of being among the first contact tribes in the Americas. And as such, we have a 4-century-old tradition of interacting with the forces of colonization. This means we have 4 centuries of grievances. We have seen time and again that the promises of forever rarely last more than 30 years. We've seen that when the powers of colonization seek to commodify a resource, they often do so one small piece at a time. What they don't take this year, they will take in 30 years' time. Jean Quick-to-See Smith, a Native American visual artist, she tells us that where her tribe was once able to utilize the resources that the land provided, fence posts now mark private property. Landowners paint their fence posts orange. And if you cross a boundary, she asserts, you will be shot. These fence posts represent dishonest dealings, the withholding of resources, and a type of individual ownership that is not part of the native worldview. They signal danger. The reality that many indigenous people continue to live under, the weight and betrayal of the settler colonizer nation states around the world, is evidence of continued othering. In the United States, from the beginning, we have struggled to answer the question of who is the we in the Constitution's opening words, we the people. This is about the question of who belongs. John Powell, who leads the UC Berkeley Othering and Belonging Institute, has thought and written extensively about othering and belonging. He writes, and while most people in the land that was to become the United States of America were not included in that we, in many ways the history of the country has been about continuing to both address and define who is in the we. To be in the we was to belong and therefore participate in creating the society and in creating the meaning that was attached to that belonging. Being outside the we was to be othered, without the recognized right to participate in the constitution of the country, to give meaning, and in many cases, even to be seen as fully human. The country's relationship with indigenous nations, women, and enslaved people from Africa was very much bound up with the issue of who was in the we, and it still is. And Powell goes further This assertion of being part of the we, of belonging, is now being challenged again by Trump and many of his supporters. The struggle of who belongs and who can be part of the we continues. And in this country, that struggle has always had a relationship of white dominance attached to it. These questions have been and continue to be foundational for our country and indeed for the world. This serious othering of denying the humanity of others, seeing them as a problem and a threat, can lead to placing children in cages, building walls, or even genocide. We hear discussions about purifying and cleansing and getting rid of. But where there may be more moderate views, as among many liberals, you will see what Powell calls saming. This is where we're likely to say about those who are being demonized, they're just like us. There aren't any real differences. I can remember recent discussions about Black Lives Matter, where liberals I know would say, why can't we just say all lives matter? Which basically suggests that differences don't make any difference when they really do. Do we want to live in a society where our histories and experiences are all the same? And so we turn to belonging. According to Powell, belonging is based on the recognition of our full humanity without having to become something different or pretend we're all the same. True belonging means we're creating space to hear and see and be with each other. It's about creating compassionate space and practices where we can acknowledge each other's stories and suffering, constructing stories that we allow spaces for others. It's about co-constructing a larger we. How do we embody belonging in our individual and our congregational living? One of my former UU pastors, the late Reverend Greg Martin, did a remarkable job of guiding us. First, the principles and values that we hold dear and that we covenant to uphold can be an example, an alternative identity to the larger culture, a sign pointing to a way to live that is humane, just, and potentially beneficial for all people, as well as the interconnected web of life. Second, we are a faith community that seeks to live by and practice these values of belonging in our life together and our shared ministry to each other. We seek to experience and embody them now together as we are here. And third, we seek to actualize belonging not just in our own lives, but in the larger society, seeking freedom, equity, and justice in pursuit of peace and unity for all living beings. What Greg was saying about having an alternative identity is that our individual and collective role is to be countercultural, to stand over against the oppressive values of the larger culture, to essentially embrace those belonging values which we have come to believe as foundational for living and for civilizing our culture. Our existing cultural institutions and stories that are oppressive and accept and further othering will not carry us to the future that we want. We can point the way for others around us, be a sign, a contrast community to what the world needs to become, with the alternative values and principles of belonging that don't always shape the lives of the rest of the world. Can we imagine a world where we all belong and can all participate? Those who share the vision of a world of belonging must focus on a new story, a vision of a world and a society where people matter and are valued, where differences are welcomed and embraced, where human beings live in harmony with other planetary life, and ecological forces as well as other human beings. We are a demonstration community also, he said. We covenant together to actually live by these values that embrace belonging and to practice them in our lives and in our life together with one another. Not only are we a sign and a demonstration community, we also believe in transforming the larger society, of changing oppressive policies and institutions. We believe in being an active instrument for change. Greg said those yellow shirts began showing up in places like Ferguson, Missouri, and Baltimore, Maryland, and New Orleans, Louisiana, and communities in Michigan, in all kinds of places, to say we need to be in solidarity because all lives do not matter equally in our society. And until they do, we will walk and we will hold hands and link arms and we will be present and we will witness and we will speak and give voice and we will march the halls of the State House and talk with our representatives. We will pound on the doors of senators. We will do whatever it takes in this world for beloved community to be real for us all. If we do this, we will be going against the grain of our consumer-oriented culture, going against the grain of our individualistic culture, and going against the grain of our othering and divisive culture. By embodying belonging, we are demonstrating and serving the common good, the good of all. When we care about the progress of all members of our society, opportunity is no longer just about personal success, but also about our success as a community of siblings of many colors. As we build the world we dream about, we believe that we must work together with those most marginalized in our communities. It's not easy because some people we may want to build relationships with may not trust us or our motives. Given the history of racism and economic inequality, this is not surprising. Building relationships of belonging will be a slow process that will require repeated evidence of everyone's commitment. We need to learn how we each can complement and learn from the other. Belonging means standing with, joining with, struggling with, crying with, celebrating with. It means showing respect and care and seeking understanding, drawing on the deep insights and experiences of those who've been standing strong in the midst of difficult times and circumstances. It means risk. Belonging means that some of us with privilege take on some of the risks faced by others every day. It means being vulnerable and living at times with uncertainty and anxiety. This is what standing with means. In belonging, we do this by creating partnerships with and working alongside people and organizations that are working for social change. This is how we translate our values into action and activism. Those of us who have white skin privilege or economic privilege or educational privilege can make such a big difference just by showing up. We must see belonging as a personal investment, the creation of a relationship that places demands on our time and our treasure, that carries with it a sense of shared obligation and accountability. Being Unitarian Universalist is demanding and encourages enlarged self-interest in its members. How you choose to use your time, your money, who you hold in your mind and heart as shared struggle, how you look for and act on oppressive policies and actions in the people and institutions that surround you, schools, libraries, doctors' offices, hospitals, corporations, churches, banks, golf clubs, shopping malls, police, city councils, real estate companies and realtors, human service agencies, the United Way, your own extended family, where you see power being exercised over, not power with. This is how you embody belonging as an individual and congregational expression. We must remember that belonging is not something we do for someone else. Lilla Watson, an Aboriginal elder, offers this admonition. If you have come to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. We're talking not only about the liberation of others, we're talking about our own liberation from a culture of othering to a culture of belonging. Support for belonging carries with it a strong awareness that the relationship we build is not one we can walk away from easily. It means having the willingness to stay with it, to invest in such a way that we are personally transformed and changed. It requires going into it with a humble heart and mind and openness to being changed, that I will learn from those whose lives have sometimes been painfully different from my own. It means joining our strength with their strength. Sharon Welsh, professor and former provost at Meadville Seminary, has offered the following caution in her book, A Feminist Ethic of Risk. It is easier to give up on long-term social change when one is comfortable in the present. When it is possible to have challenging work, excellent health care and housing, and access to the fine arts, when the good life is present or within reach, it's tempting to despair of it ever being in reach for others and resort merely to enjoying it for oneself and one's family. Becoming so easily discouraged is the privilege of those accustomed to too much power, accustomed to having needs met without negotiation and work, accustomed to having a political and economic system that responds to their needs. Welsh suggests that it's easier to be responsible when you are supporting the status quo. Unfortunately, I find that much of my embrace of contemporary culture supports her observation. I have to force myself to think and act counterculturally. I have to force myself to think about the church, my congregation, counterculturally. It's so easy to let the current culture to be what it is and all of its dehumanizing impact on persons who it has marginalized and mistreated. I'm reminded of the words of Martin Luther King Jr. in his powerful letter from Birmingham jail. I must confess that over the last few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. He says, the white moderate is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. We will have to repent in this generation for the appalling silence of the good people. We must come to see that human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and persistent work of people willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. I had hoped that the white moderate would see this. I guess I should have realized that few members of a race that has oppressed another race can understand or appreciate the deep groans and passionate yearnings of those that have been oppressed. And still fewer have the vision to see that injustice must be rooted out by strong, persistent, and determined action. King is pleading with us to be countercultural, to stand over against the prevailing culture of othering and embrace genuine belonging. It will not be easy when we take seriously the oppressive conditions that so many people have endured. Listen carefully to their stories and engage fully. We are embodying what we have come to hold as our worthiest loves, including freedom from oppression and helping to free those who are oppressed. If we choose to be countercultural, we will be making a commitment to altering the way we live our ordinary everyday lives. by embodying the values we espouse, which include respecting the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Dr. King said, "Our goal is to create a beloved community, and this will require a qualitative change in our souls, as well as a quantitative change in our lives." Tim Wise, a longtime activist and supporter of racial justice, says we often focus on what to do rather than why we're doing it. The motivation for helping often goes unexamined. It's not about white guilt, Wise says. Guilt will not liberate anybody from anything. It's not about guilt. It's about responsibility. It is showing up because we share responsibility for our common humanity. If you don't see yourself as bound up with the lives of other people, I'm not sure what kind of help you can be, he explained. And again, the words of Lila Watson: "If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." The African-American writer Alice Walker reflected on her own struggles against othering. This is a long story. In Mississippi, where I lived from 1967 to 1974, people who challenged the system anticipated menace, battery, even murder every day. During my years of being close to people engaged in changing the world, I have seen fear turn into courage, because whatever the consequences, people standing side by side have expressed who they really are, and that ultimately they believe in the love of the world and each other enough to be that, which is the foundation of activism. It has become a common feeling, I believe, as we have watched our heroes falling over the years, that our small stone of activism, which might not seem to measure up to the rugged boulders of heroism we have so admired, is a paltry offering toward the building of an edifice of hope. Many who believe this choose to withhold their offerings out of shame. This is the tragedy of the world. For we can do nothing substantial toward changing our course on the planet, a destructive one, without rousing ourselves, individual by individual, and bringing our small imperfect stones to the pile. In this regard, I have a story to tell. In the mid-60s, during a voter registration campaign in South Georgia, my canvassing partner, Beverly, a local Black teenager, was arrested on a bogus moving violation charge. This was meant to intimidate her, show her her place, and terrify her family. Those of us who feared for her safety during the night held a vigil outside the jail. I remember the raw vulnerability I felt as the swaggering state troopers, each of them 3 times Beverly's size and mine, stomped in and out of the building, scowling at us. The feeling of solidarity with Beverly and our friends was strong, but also the feeling of being alone, as it occurred to me that not even my parents knew where I was. We were Black and very young. We knew no one in white America paid the slightest attention to the deaths of such as us. It was partly because of this that we sometimes resented the presence of the white people who came to stand and take their chances with us. I was one of those to whom such resentment came easily. I especially resented blonde Paul from Minnesota, whose Aryan appearance meant, when he was not with us, freedom and almost worship in the race-obsessed South. I had treated him with coolness since the day we met. We certainly did not invite him to our vigil. And yet, at just the moment I felt most downhearted, I heard someone coming along the street in our direction, whistling. A moment later, Paul appeared, still whistling, a movement spiritual that sounded strange, even comical on his lips. He calmly took his place beside us. Knowing his Nordic presence meant a measure of safety for us, and without being asked, he offered it. This remains a moment, bright as any I recall from that time. Show up. Embrace belonging wholeheartedly. I believe the offering this morning will focus on the children in the Khasi Hills of India, where the Unitarian Union of Northeast India Education Committee provides support to many lower grade elementary schools. I encourage you to think of this offering not as charity, but as an investment, part of an investment that has been going on for over 100 years. Think of it as an investment that calls for your continuing support of a life-giving tradition that others depend on and join with you to carry out. Think of it as an investment in belonging that stands over against the othering that denies opportunity and persistently treats these children and their families as less deserving. Think of this as an investment that may require ongoing investment of your individual and collective work of caring, respect, understanding, and responsibility. Think of this as an investment in belonging that might bring you into the greater joyful proximity with these children and their journeys. This is how we can overcome othering, through embodying belonging and giving life the shape of justice and actively building the world we dream about. May it be so.